Hello and good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Right Here, Right Now live show. Going live very shortly. Well, I am live, but I'm bringing from the backstage a quite amazing human being. There's many other words I could use, many other adjectives, many other verbs, but just amazing is what I'm going to leave you with for now. I'm trying to practice with sharing a retreat that's coming up, 5th to the 7th of April 2022, but I'm going to talk about that later because I just want to get Jane on, to be honest with you. So give us a second, I'll see you shortly, and I'll give you a bit of a warm-up as to what to expect over the next 30 or so minutes. See you shortly. Hi there, welcome to the Right Here, Right Now live show. This show has one simple question. What's on your heart and mind right here, right now in this moment? We explore the depths and breadths of our humanity through that one simple question over the course of 30 to 45 minutes. I hope that you'll join us. I hope you'll enjoy the exploration. And this tune was created for me personally by the incredible Peter Griffiths, one half of the amazing Mind Takeaway. Do let us know what you think. Let us know what you take away. And of course, we always welcome challenges too. Hope to see you on the exploration. So there is the amazing human being. What can I say, Jane Adshead-Grant? Welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, thank you, Gary. I'm well, and just really excited to connect with you again. To welcome any of those who are listening in to us today.
Oh, well, thank you for sparing the time. We were just chatting before we came back on live, just reminiscing a little bit about that amazing experience in Switzerland with the Ignite team and with Nuodia and other people. It's incredible what's happened in those 2 and a bit years, Jane.
Oh, isn't it just? And I thank you, Gary, for being quite an amazing ambassador of the topic, as you know, that I'm passionate about and dear to my heart, which is listening, and the impact you're having on the lives of others through helping them engage in this, and the wonderful work that you do too. All very people focused. I think we're having in common, Gary, this idea of, bringing the best out in others for them to be who they're meant to be. So it's great to be here.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, for anyone that may not actually know you, or maybe the first time they're coming across you, would you mind giving a bit of a lowdown into, who is Jane? And then we can go into that one question that's going to be our seed for today.
Gosh, thank you. So, well, I'm a mum of 2 beautiful girls. I feel very privileged to be called their mum. They're both young adults now. So it's been a journey of parenting, and part of that journey has been my own growth and development and seeing others, in this case our 2 daughters. So that's one of my biggest priorities, in creating a world for them to be their best selves. And how else I spend my time, I'm very lucky to coach. So I'm an executive coach. I coach leaders in business, small businesses, large businesses, very much on the idea of, the focus is around developing a more people-centric leadership, and also to be compassionate in how they lead others. And as part of that, in how they then grow their business. But my interest lies in helping people focus on how they show up and taking the profound responsibility they have as a leader. And then the thinking environment is something that I feel hugely passionate about. My life was transformed when I met with Nancy Kline and trained with her in what it means to create an environment where everybody matters. And we discover the art of listening generatively to generate the finest thinking and self-expression in another. So that's who I am, a mum, a leadership coach, and a teacher.
Thank you for being all of those things. No, I myself trained, and will look to train more with you in future years with Nancy Kline's thinking environment. And it was profound. It truly was a profound, game-changing experience. So let's get into the question of the day, because it's always interesting. You gave your introduction, Jane, and that may or may not inform how you answer the seed of the show, which is, what is on your heart and mind right here, right now, in this very moment, Jane?
Gosh, thank you. Well, in this very moment, I am really intrigued in, this idea of listening. It remains a question in my mind regularly throughout the day. And I guess what's on my heart and mind is something that I'm preparing for, which is writing a blog for another dear friend of mine around what are we missing out on when we don't listen? And I wondered what your thoughts are on that. What's your experience? What do you think we might be missing out on when we don't listen?
The thing I love about you, Jane, the show about uplifting your voice, getting people to know more about Jane, and you're straight into giving mode again. That's what I love about you so much. Inviting people in. For me personally, we're missing the whole human, is probably how I would summarize it. If we're not listening that beautiful generative way that you teach, we're only seeing a very small fraction of that person in front of us. How about you?
Yeah, well, I love that. And I've begun to think about it, and perhaps actually, as you describe it beautifully, as the whole human. And when I was thinking about this, I think what we miss is the connection, a deeper connection with the person to whom we're interacting with. I think we miss the opportunity to be creative. Certainly in my experience, I become more creative once I've had the opportunity to listen to another. And it's in that generative listening where we build upon each other's thinking and ideas that we both end up becoming more creative. So yeah, those are the first couple of thoughts that are coming to my mind now about what we miss out on when we don't listen, a deeper connection and the opportunity to be even more creative. I have some more ideas, but let me tap into you too, Gary. What do you now think, given this is a conversation?
Well, my head's reacting like crazy already, Jane. There's always the case with being in a space with you, but it's really interesting because what's now popped out for me is the word leverage. So yes, building on the interplay, building on each other's thoughts, us both becoming more creative together, is what's the exponential impact of that? What's the leverage point of that? So if we're able to do that as just two people, what happens then when two of us then do it with another two, and then another two do it with another two? Then you're suddenly getting into that beautiful exponential impact of generative listening if we come at it through this space. And I've not thought about it before, that exponential potentiality that comes through holding space for generative listening, that 2 by 2 by 2 by 2 effect.
Yeah, and as I listen to you there, I'm wondering, for our listeners, whoever may be listening, is they may be wondering, what do we mean by generative listening? Lots is written about active listening, perhaps reflective listening. And so maybe it's worth just sharing a little bit about my experience of generative listening and what I mean by that. And for me, generative listening is the ultimate level of listening. It is a listening that frees the mind rather than directs it. It's a listening that seeks to encourage the speaker, the thinker, to go to the edge of their thinking, their own self-expression. And generative listening really emerges from, as us, the listener, we behave in certain ways, very much akin to the thinking environment. In fact, my work, as you know, has been informed, my work on listening and the studying of it, both academically as well as a practitioner, has been informed by Anansi's work in the thinking environment. But I'm increasingly noticing the impact of this listening generatively that ignites the best thinking in others. And one of the things that strikes me afresh now is what we miss out on when we don't listen, when we fall into the kind of pretend listening, or we allow distractions and interruptions to sabotage our thinking or the space that we seek to create. What we miss out on is courage. we miss out on our own courage as a listener to be willing to listen to another. And we also miss out on encouraging. So if filling the speaker, the thinker, with the courage to share what's really on their heart, what's on their mind, what matters most, and the courage it takes to share their thoughts and ideas and speak as themselves, free from the fear, if you like, or retribution of what someone else might think or want them to think or want them to say, just to please them. So for me, another thing, this is another interesting element for me about what we miss out on when we don't listen, is courage, both for ourselves as a listener and also for the speaker. What about you?
It's so interesting. Something I've really been sitting in, Jane, honestly, the last few weeks has been that freedom that you're speaking to. Like, do we miss out on the freedom of thought, freedom of innovation, that feeling of letting go of the shackles of, I'll be good enough when, or if I've got that job, or when I've got the next, fill in the blank. There's something very freeing about this space. And why that's relevant to the last few weeks for me has been this: I've probably lacked empathy a little bit for those in those executive roles. And I think this space allows us to reflect and sense into empathy. Are we, are we able to empathize as much if we're not creating this space to listen in the way that we're describing?
Gosh, I appreciate that, Gary, and discerning when to listen with empathy, because as you'll know from kindly having read my book and seen my card deck around the different levels of listening with empathy for me is a key part of it. And, we build our empathy with another through the way we behave, the way we get interested in another, not just what they're saying, but also what they're not saying. There's kind of non-verbal cues. And also for me, being empathetic is around considering another person's perspective on life, their own lived experience, their own worldview. And what's popping up for me now is sort of building on the courage piece I shared earlier, is how when we don't listen, what we miss out on is being compassionate. For me, I have the privilege of running a workshop on, compassionate leadership. And, one of the key tenets of compassionate leadership is listening. Leaders who listen because they're willing to learn. They're willing to have their mind changed. They want their team members to be resourceful and be that creative, be innovative, as you said. So there's another element for me that's on my heart is around when we don't listen, we miss out on, we step over the opportunity to show compassion and be compassionate with another. And only this morning I had the privilege of listening to somebody who shared her own health story, when she was believed with cancer and following Crohn's disease, and how she hopes for this year to be in remission. And I don't know this lady very well. We've connected once or twice independently, but we're more often in a group together. And it was such a privilege to listen to her and to show the compassion for her, with her, given what she's going through. And the impact it had for me personally was to be more courageous for myself, courageous in not taking my own body for granted, my own health for granted. And she ignited afresh in me a word that I've chosen for myself I chose 2 words for myself this year, Gary. One is discipline and one is difference. And difference has been coming up all over since I began this work, beginning of the year. How much difference has been showing up in my life. And I've been open to it and aware of it and celebrating it. But discipline had eluded me. I'd set it out. I knew I wanted to be more disciplined in my personal life, around what I eat and how I give time for myself and all of those things. So I thought, discipline, this is what I want. But it was in listening to Sunny this morning that she inspired me with the discipline she holds to serve her health and well-being, such that she'll get into remission. And perhaps I wouldn't have had that ignition of discipline had I not listened.
Wow.
What about you? What comes up for you as you kindly listen to me now?
It's really, really quite linked to that last share, actually, Jane, which is, as you know, I've had my own version of a cancer journey, and it actually, wow, what's popping up for me is listening to our body. Do we listen to our body enough? If we're not, so that's part of the unheard listening for me. So not necessarily at a human to human voice level, but when our body tells us something, do we listen to it or do we suppress it? Or do we allow it to come through and out? That's popping up quite powerfully, because I remember when I had my cancer that my body told me very early on something was going on. And that's part of the reason I was able to deal with it as a stage 1 and not a stage 5, because I responded to the call. That's coming up really quite powerfully, actually.
Wow. And what have you learned, I wonder, for yourself in that capacity to listen more to your body?
Yeah, it's funny how it ripples out into all of your life. So what I mean by that, Jane, is I'm finding that I trust my body as one of the senses to listen a lot more. So it's like you've got, well, they say you've got 3 brains, I think they say, don't you? So there really is this. I feel like I've got an extra part of my intelligence switched on, which wasn't switched on prior to that experience, I would say. Yeah.
And so what's emerging for me now is the question is, I wonder how we can get better at listening to ourselves, our bodies and ourselves, before we have that kind of nudging, niggling feeling or whatever, as a way of being more connected to ourselves, taking this space for reflection, perhaps taking a pause. And I'm so appreciative of our everyday life that we can get caught up with, the urgency and the constant distractions and the constant pulls on our time and attention. And so it's a beautiful question, and actually now making me think another thing we miss out on when we don't listen, our capacity to care for ourselves as well as caring for others. And so I'm reflecting now on actually how self-care is really important, but those in a sort of a giving and a serving environment, it's quite often the thing that is last on our list, because we're driven or we're excited by, we feel drawn, driven, called probably in our service to others, that we can sometimes overlook what's required for ourselves. But feeling inspired by others who have mastered, whether it be a meditation, whether it be a much more proactive noticing, whether it be more conscious, as we navigate these different waves of life, perhaps moving into a different season of life. My husband just turned 50, bless him, and he was saying, whoa, actually this is quite a moment. How do I now need to take care of myself, my body differently? I can no longer take it for granted. I do feel the aches and pains when we've just come back from a long walk, or we've done something, a rigorous event of something. And so maybe another element of what we miss out on when we don't listen is our capacity to care for ourselves as well as others.
It's beautiful. Yeah, and what's popping up for me, Jane, it's just the weaves of the connection piece just keeps coming up. So whatever that means to each of us, I talk about, connection to ourselves, to each other, and actually to the systems that sustain us. That's an increasing focus of mine personally. And there's a depth to this. Do we miss the depth if we're not listening generatively? Do we miss the depth of one another in terms of that connection? Is it surface level, or is there something more connected, more meaningful? That's something. And again, I guess there's a choice. I wonder what your thoughts are around Maybe we want to choose to be in a more shallow connection, but there's something about this generative listening that allows us to go deeper much quicker, should we so wish to do that, which would otherwise be missed.
I think you raise a great point around our preferences. You know, there'll be people who, you know, human connection is something that's really important to them. And there are other people who were like, actually, I'm less interested in that. So working in the virtual environment really suits me well. I don't have to go into the office. I don't have to meet people. It's awesome. I can do all my work. And guess what? I can even do my work with my camera turned off. For some people, that works. That is, you know, they love, you know, and I don't want to, I suppose I am generalizing, but, you know, they perhaps have the preference for data. They love numbers, they love words, they love, you know, analyzing and creating and building from data. And there'll be other people who love the human connection. They get their energy from, you know, from being live, you know, like we are now. So I think that piece, connection, will come with different preferences. And what you've sparked in me now is, and I know you're so good at thinking in this way, is the system, the impact of system and the system that we're in. And again, only this morning, a friend of mine raised a beautiful question around, you know, how do we help, or how do we kind of generate our collective thinking in dealing with big issues, systemic issues, i.e. the pandemic. And something happened for me this weekend that I was really interested in, I was curious about, which was watching the Sunday morning show, and the lady from the World Health Organization came on. Sophie Rayworth is now hosting the Sunday morning show. And Sophie was asking questions of the lady from the World Health Organization, saying, well, you know, do you think it's right that the UK should, you know, reduce its measures and not worry about masks anymore and reduce all that? And what was really interesting was the lady from the World Health Organization said, you know, we still hope and pray that governments will keep in some of the common sense practical measures, because we're not through the pandemic yet. And it would be wrong to think we are, even though we've seen a reduction in cases and reduction in the pressure on the health service. But what really stood out for me, Gary, is that you have somebody from the World Health Organization is thinking about this from a long-term perspective, long-term thinking, and the breadth and width of our world. And then you have us here in the UK solely thinking about how does it work for us? You know, we've fared one of the best European countries from an economic perspective. We've been very lucky with our vaccine rollout's been phenomenal compared to some of our eastern, you know, Far Eastern countries. And it really got me thinking about, you know, generating and thinking for the goodness of everybody. So whilst our own country might be faring well, what about the cases in India? What about the countries in the Middle East? What about those who have not yet had the benefit of the vaccine like we have? And if we can only begin to think more broadly and connect with people who are not even on our continent, but we can stop the spread happening over there by us giving more attention and just sticking with the masks and the, you know, considerations a little bit more broadly. What do you now think?
Oh, wow, you've really sparked a big reaction in me, actually, in this topic. So, because there is this sort of vaccine apartheid almost, where certain countries have access and certain countries do not. And I love where you're pointing towards, Jane, which is this: what would it be like? What are we missing by not having this generative listening space? We're missing the ability to see past borders of the mind, borders of countries, all of which are made up by thinking. So creating the space for those stories, those beliefs to drop and realize that it is actually about the collective and not just the UK. That's what we are missing, the ability to nudge systems very quickly by not using this space. I genuinely believe that.
I agree. And I think it is that lovely open-mindedness of, I think, you know, Oscar Trimboli is an amazing listener in our world. And he often talks about, the idea of, a great listener is one who is willing to have their mind changed. And I love that idea, and in that, actually now bringing me back to the word I chose for myself this year was discipline. And I think listening is a discipline. I think if we truly want to listen to another, A, we have to make the decision to listen to somebody, and B, then at what level? Are we listening with empathy? Are we listening that takes them to the next level, i.e. generatively? And this idea of listening, it reduces borders. I love that. And the word freedom is now emerging for me. And actually, I think discipline creates freedom. I know it sounds a paradox, but if we can be disciplined to hold that space, to truly be interested in another, to give our attention, to allow them to think what they think, feel what they feel, without us giving a judgment, without us listening simply to diagnose, analyze, or make our own reply, this is what I feel is very freeing. What do you think?
It's, when you feel it, and you're back to this point about feeling in your body, I've got a very felt reaction to what you just shared, which is, it's part of the reason I trained with you in the first place. To be honest, I knew there was something, but I didn't understand it at the time. Is this ability to connect across borders, globally, past cultures, past language, being in a space like this with people you can't even speak with, you would still be able to communicate. Mm-hmm. And there's something about that. It's almost an energy that comes with this space. So actually, if we don't create the conditions to allow this to happen, what we're losing, what are we not gaining, is that abundance of energy between human beings that isn't always spoken. So an energy source is capped between us if we don't create this space.
Mm. And I'm wondering now, how has listening at this level impacted you, Gary, in your life?
So for me personally, it has a home. Probably start there. Number one is I'm definitely a less, if I maybe reframe it another way, I'll answer the question a bit differently. What did I do a lot more of that I do less of now is less judgment. Consciously less judgment, particularly of myself, but also of others, of situations. So that's probably the number one biggest transformation element, is because in the spirit of our discussion today, the less I've judged, the less space that's taken up in my experience of life, hence freedom. So that judgment piece is probably the biggest one by far. And again, it's not overt, you are this or you are that, polarization judging, just those little, okay, so-and-so this, or you should have said that, or I think you could have done that better. Those little moments of judging that still take up an exponentially bigger space than they should do in our experience. I think that's probably the number one for me. How about you?
Gosh, it's huge. I mean, for me, listening at this level transformed my life. And it was so good. And hence I went on to discover it, learn it, teach it, write about it in many ways. So for me, the impact it's had has been to be witness to some extraordinary growth, development, change, and transition positively in the lives of others.
That's beautiful. Wow. Well, Jane, I just want to, as we come to wrap up today's session, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for showing up as you do. Thanks for everything you're bringing. Thanks for just creating the spaces that you create, because you've reminded me today of not only just the truly interconnected power of generative listening at a local, macro, and really at any level that we wish to invite it in. So thank you. I'd love to offer you the last word. Please do let us know, of course, as well. I'd love you to talk a bit about, maybe before you go, the new book, how people can get that, and anything else you might want to share before you go. Thank you.
Wow. Well, I would love to finish with an appreciation of you, Gary, for being an extraordinary ambassador of listening, of human-centric leadership, and also creating the space you talk about so beautifully for others. You're one of the most giving individuals and such a role model for showing up as you, being vulnerable, and in that vulnerability, driving, creating even deeper connection and inspiring others to be that way. So thank you. Thank you for inviting me to share a little of my book. I'm thrilled, really delighted to share. Yeah, I just published The Listening Coach. Copy here, coach yourself through the elements of listening that are critical in life, business, and our communities. People can get hold of it on Amazon. It's available as a paperback as well as a Kindle. And the audible version will be coming out in March.
Oh, fantastic. So exciting. Well, I've also got my 5 copies have arrived in the post, which is amazing. And just for anyone that might be listening, these will be going to 5 hand-picked senior leaders that are partly close to me and a couple a little bit further away that I know would value that as a little bit of an anonymous gift that I will follow up with them in the months ahead. So Jane, again, thank you for everything you are. And yeah, I wish anyone that joined us, if you've joined us without us knowing, thank you. If you watch this back, thank you. And please do check out Jane's website, all of her work, the book, The Listening Coach. And thank you, Jane, for everything you do. Appreciate you joining me today.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
Take care, everyone. Thank you very much.